right. Yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. Thanks to everybody who came. My name's Joe. For those who don't know me, I'm the manager of the Aquaculture Information Exchange. We are a NOAA and USDA funded social networking platform for collaboration, networking for the US aquaculture community. Um, Today we have Tim. How you pronounce your last name, Tim?
Birthisel.
Birthisel, yeah, presenting on transforming offshore ecosystems. I'm excited because, yeah, usually I have to like reach out to people to uh, get them to present, but Tim volunteered, which is what we really want to see with our website. We want to give our members a opportunity to present about things that they work on in aquaculture or their expertise. Um, and just before Tim starts, I just wanted to quickly share our Connect and Learn group. That's what these virtual sessions are called, Connect and Learn presentations. So you can join the group if you go from the home page on the website. You can join the Connect and Learn group either over here or by clicking on the top here with groups and finding it that way. And then you can join to discuss the presentations, or you can, that's where I also upload recordings of the videos. If you want to watch them later or share them, that's where they will be. But yeah, without further ado, go ahead, take it away, Tim.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, just a brief note. My background is Bachelor of Science in Zoology. Living in Ohio, went to Ohio State, 37 years as an R&D manager and director in agribusiness. And along halfway through that career, I decided to start an aquaculture operation down in the Florida Keys, where I'd been sport diving since the mid 70s. So I'm dating myself here. And I had the opportunity to see the decline in the reef conditions up close and personal. And it disturbed me enough that I decided to get involved. And at first, and it continues, it's a for-profit operation. And I'm actually considered a Florida farmer, even though I reside in North Carolina. So I visit the Keys 2 months out of the year, month in the spring, month in the fall, and that's where I do my work. And that's been going on for about 30 years now. So I'm going to jump into my little presentation. See if we can get this to work. Yeah. So my talk is devoted to the Elkhorn corals that formerly dominated the Florida Keys where I'm operating. When I first started diving in the 70s, they were a fairly common sight, including this picture that I took. Today they're almost extinct. They're just mechanically falling apart, dying, dead, disappeared. The only ones that you see struggling to survive today in the Keys have been planted by some of the restoration people. You may have seen recently where NOAA has generated some guidelines for sustainable aquaculture. Personally, I think sustainability is unacceptable. The current situation, don't want to maintain that. We need to grow habitat if at all possible. And I think there's a great way to do that. And it relates and it depends on aquaculture. There we go. Yep. So yeah, the name of the company is Terra Subaqua. It's a commercial marine life sanctuary. And it's that way because product quality in my live rock and coral products that I sell to zoos and large aquarium displays and some serious hobbyists, it depends on a whole ecosystem existing where you're trying to grow this stuff. And the regulators won't let you operate near the coral reef where all this biology is going on. So I chose to go out in a different area outside the fringing reef. And so this will show you where I'm working. If you give you a little frame of reference, zooming in, it's all about planet Earth to begin with, but the little strip that we're operating in, about where that boat is cruising through, is the beginning of our operating sandbox, I call it. It's the sand flats outside the fringing reef, which is just inshore of where we're working. So important area to try and take advantage of. I think it's got a lot of potential. It's a untapped resource. Every day out in the sand flats, there's plankton going on that's trying to settle and start up basically a coral reef. Almost everything that lives on the coral reef exists as a planktonic organization or organism for a period of time till it settles out. So we start with abiotic, we call it, meaning lifeless features that we add to this sand flat environment to start the process. So we plant the sand flats with vertical structures. The sand flats, incidentally, they're deeper than the reefs. They're cleaner than the reefs because most of the pollution is coming from the shore side. It is cooler water, which is a really important thing in this age of global warming, especially like last summer was a killer year. But my farm being a little bit deeper, further away, did better. The fishing pressure, not really existent. It's considered a motor through zone because of the uniform sand bottom. There's no cover for fish, so not many people bother to fish there. The sandy seafloor outside the reef edge gently slopes from about 50 feet. My first operation here is at 56, and it goes down a couple of miles further out, very gently sloping to 150 foot, which is the beginning of the twilight zone. They call it the mesophotic reef zone. And as you go a little bit deeper than that, the reefs that exist out there are actually doing pretty well. It's the shallow reefs that are dying. So this is what the sand flats look like. Very featureless. Nothing can grow out there. Despite that, the fact that, you know, the conditions are actually superior. All we need to do is have some hard bottom out there, but it doesn't exist. It's buried by the sand. And the sand has been generated by hundreds of millions of years of bioerosion off the coral reef. It's called Halimeda sand because a lot of the little granules are the skeletons of a calcareous seaweed called Halimeda. But they're little shell fragments, etc. So this is the result of hundreds of millions of years of weathering of the living reef, and it now imprisons the reefs. It keeps them placed where they are. The reefs can't get out into that cleaner, deeper water because there's no hard bottom to settle it on. So this is where some of our structures we planted brand new on the previous section there, and then after 6 months, settlement starts to change things. You got the fish operating around all these discoloring growths that is the beginning of a coral reef, if you will. So the big challenge and why nobody's been operating out there is hurricanes. And they have been my plague and my instructor for 30 years because I've had 4 pretty much devastating occurrences of hurricanes starting about 5 years after I started, another 5 years after that. They had the, at the time, worst record in the history of the Florida Keys with 4 or 5 hurricanes impacting the area. Worst case has been in 2017 with Hurricane Irma, which was Cat 4, when it smashed into my operation in the Upper Keys there. The right shoulder of that hurricane blasted in there and raised up 35-foot waves over my farm, which is only 56 feet deep. So you can imagine what the bottom was doing. It was pretty well torn up. And everything I had learned up to that, I thought I was doing pretty good with hurricanes. I withstood a few, but this one was a whole different beast. And the nice thing is I've learned from it, and I think I'm ready for another one like it. Not that I want one to happen. What we've done recently is begin using a structural module that I call it emulating elkhorn. Doesn't really much look like an elkhorn. It's not very aesthetically pleasing, but the ecosystem, the biology, seems to adapt to it very quickly and call it home. The way we've stabilized this, you see that rebar with the rock stacked on it, it's inserted, half of it is under the sand. So I'm pounding and pounding to get this rebar buried in that deep sand. And once it's buried, an interesting thing happens. Calcium carbonate starts to deposit chemically, electrochemically, onto that buried rebar, so that what starts out as a 5/8 inch piece of rebar grows to 1.5 inches because of this calcium carbonate, like a concrete footer that grows around the buried part of the rebar and cements itself to that. So that thing is almost impossible to pull out of the sand. I have to use a jack in order to get it moving. Not easy, and it's the upward force that it takes to move the rebar out of the sand really in a big factor in hurricanes. It's a lateral, turbulent, and laminar type flow that's causing the problems. But so I think I'm pretty well ready for a next Hurricane Irma. These next section is the biotic features, meaning living features that start to exhibit themselves once these structures are in place in the sand flats. You get a predation refuge. In other words, a lot of critters start to move in because they use these tripods as a safe haven from predators. A lot of the fish that lay eggs start to use it as a egg-laying zone, so it quickly becomes a hatchery. There will be nurseries that grow up out of that where the juveniles are sheltered. Eventually, we get some significant herbivore grazing in the flats around the farm. This is kind of a big deal. And then vertical herbivore grazing, usually different species, on the stacks themselves. And the key is to keep the seaweed at bay from everywhere around the operation as far as possible. That's the best way to have a desirable reef environment. And of course, the natural reefs today are being invaded by seaweed, so that's a big problem there. The real tell on the ecosystem moving in is the symbiotic cleaner stations, where you get parasite removal due to various organisms that working in concert with the larger fish have developed a system. And I'll show you some examples of that from the farm. Some of this is also fed by what we call top down. In other words, large creatures from the area move in. It's not just settlement. Settlement's the first stage. But here's just a simple example of an animal moving out from the reef and wanting to hang out on the farm. We see sea turtles a lot. I'd say about every 3 or 4 trips or dive days, we've got a sea turtle or two. And they seem to enjoy the farm. There are apparently an increase in sand-dwelling organisms around the farm. So they'll be digging around and looking for creatures that live under the sand to consume. And the other thing they're doing is knocking the barnacles off their shells on my rock stacks. Typically in the past, they'd use some of the Elkhorn corals for that, but there's not as much vertical structure anymore. So a lot of the sea turtles have problems getting rid of barnacles. We got a popular spot for barnacle removal. They cause a little damage to the stacks, but I don't begrudge them. It's important for them to get the streamlined shape so they can dodge some of the boat traffic. If they have a lot of barnacles, they have a hard time getting out of the way. Here's some example of the hatchery and juvenile nursery kind of going on. You see they start to operate like mature fish, schooling together. We got a couple of other juvenile species that are trying to pick some off, like these little wrasses. And the fry are responding like a school of fish will do. And then we've got vertical herbivores. These guys, I'm 90% sure actually grew up on my farm over a period of about 7-8 years. Then they all kind of disappeared. You don't normally see groups of the rainbow parrot all the same size. There are about 70 in this group. I've never seen anything like it on the reefs, but I'm pretty sure this was a group that outgrew my farm, started wandering the reefs around the area, doing their thing, and they occasionally coming back to visit the farm. And they're welcome to me because they're great seaweed removers. To me, you can't have a coral reef without parrotfish. They don't really eat corals, incidentally, except a couple species in the Pacific do. The Atlantic species, they're chowing on seaweed. So yeah, the ecological developments we see, we get filter feeders quickly. They really clear the water up. It's amazing, their power. We get cyanobacteria control. This is an algae type, very primitive bacteria, slime bacteria that covers the ocean bottom at certain times of the year, usually in the fall or late summer. They turn all that white sand a very dark gray-green color. And we've got control of that all around the farm due to the activity of some of the grazers. And this also could be applicable to harmful algal bloom prevention in other areas. We don't get much of that yet in the Keys, but further north, they're having problems with it in Florida and elsewhere. The presence of this cyanobacteria, even though it per se is not toxic, when it depletes its food reserves and starts to die off because it's a eutrophication event where it's covering the sand, it then releases nutrients that can feed other more toxic species of algae. We also get a biodiverse habitat for some of the stress biology in the Keys. I think that's a big deal. We end up attracting large predators. They're good. They provide ecological balance so that instead of a bunch of little herbivores picking away, we get a few large herbivores that are much more efficient, and they can tolerate the predators because they can outmaneuver them. There is carbon fixation going on the coral reefs. I can't quantify what's going on, but anytime you have life growing, etc., out of the environment, you're fixing carbon. But from a standpoint of the commercial part of the operation, superior product quality. If you've got a great ecology around, you're going to have great live rock and corals. Otherwise, just like the reefs, they'll suffer. So here's an example of that kind of horizontal clearing. Caught this a few years back in a bloom of the cyanobacteria. And you can see how there's a halo around the little operation we had going on at the time underneath the boat. That much was cleared by animals that live on the farm. You can see it also in the nearby reef over to the right, where there are other naturally occurring grazers. The academic folks think it had to be the diadema sea urchin that did this sort of work. in the absence of diadema, which is depleted in the Keys now, virtually gone. Some of these blue tangs have, I think, behaviorally adapted to the opportunity, and they are chowing on this blue-green algae, thriving on it. I've got a group of about 100 mature blue tangs. I call it the blue tang gang, and they're constantly working on my farm. In fact, today I've kind of redeployed the system after Irma wiped it out. I've redesigned it, and I'm getting a lot more efficiency in terms of bottom clearing. Here you're getting maybe 25, 30-foot halo. Now I'm getting more like 50 to 70 foot. So that's a good development. I think it's pertinent to aquaculture operations to get rid of that kind of slime bacteria because it does warm the water more on a sunny day. You get the albedo effect. You can actually feel the heat radiating off that dark surface versus the white sand is quite a bit cooler. So here's an example of biodiversity. Every one of the fish you see here is a different species. And you can see where they're doing different functions. They're occupying different niches, working on the same environment. There's a juvenile rainbow parrot like that big herd you saw. A couple angels cruising around like the little rock beauty. And there's a game fish, the gray snapper. We also then attract, after a few years, some serious barracuda and other predators that are helping keep ecological balance, as you can imagine. Okay, advance the slide. Here we go. And here's one of my favorite visitors, Goliath grouper. These guys are very overfished to the degree that the whole species has become a dwarf version of the former. When I first started diving, I'd occasionally see one of these guys over 1,000 pounds. And that's the way they were before they got fished down so heavily that they started maturing at a smaller size so they could continue reproducing. And yeah, this guy's probably 200 pounds or so. But he comes and visits the reef on occasion, using it as a cleaner station. Got other predators like the triggerfish here who munches on some of the bivalves, clams, oysters, crabs, etc. He can actually crush their shells and eat the tender delicacies inside. So he's always patrolling and keeping things in balance. Now this is a neat shot of the cleaner station where this gray angel is very accustomed to me, letting me get very up close and personal. You can see inside its open gill next to the cleaner station. He's got a Pedersen's cleaner shrimp inside his head, basically, taking parasites off his gill filaments. And here's a cousin species, the French angel, and they do things like this tail dance to attract the little wrasses to come over and pick parasites off of them. Very important feature on a coral reef. After the storms, the cleaner stations get disrupted. The fish go around, burdened by a lot of parasites, and they're kind of sick and lethargic for a while until the cleaner stations get reestablished. Here's one of my favorite shots, the resident green moray on the farm. You can see that cleaner go beyond his head, right between his eyes. And the moray will open his mouth and let the little goby go inside to do his work. They have a mutual agreement not to eat the cleaner. Symbiosis, great example of that. Many other examples, I won't take the time now. From an operational standpoint, it's really fun working underwater. Scuba diving is a blast. I've always enjoyed it. Been doing it well more than half my life. But here's one of my buddies working on the farm, volunteer. And you can see he's just kind of loosely holding these two buckets. He's holding about 70 pounds of weight total there. And he's just using his fingertips because they weigh about half in the underwater due to buoyancy. One of the advantages of working down there. And the other advantage is when we're harvesting, these all buckets lined up all have harvested product in them. We attach a line up to the boat from each bucket and have the lift bags on them. Once all the divers are on board, we don't like to have overhead loads when divers are in the water. All the divers get on board. We just tug on these lines. They're raised up off the bottom very easily. And as they start to come up, the volume in the bag expands and it automatically rises to the surface. We can easily pull it over the boat and winch it aboard. And here's what what I call the EcoPod looks like. That's that container of product I mentioned. We gently stack the rock in place, try not to crush any of the prominent growths. And you can see there's a lift tube in here with a bubble air source connected into it. So the lift tube goes in down on the ocean floor. The rocks are stacked around it. We bring the rocks aboard. We hook the lift tube up to a good air supply, and it needs to be a really good air supply. The fountain of bubbling water comes up out of that lift tube a couple inches when it's in the proper volume, and that produces quite a serious flow in the bucket, bottom to top, keeping it recirculating, which is what is occurring in the natural environment. The oceanic currents are always operating. Keep that going all the way to the customer, along with other life support efforts. Oh, incidentally, I like to leave these buckets filled, and I even recommend my customers keep them on hand and just kind of move them in and out during the day for a month or so. What happens is all the grazers that are already in that, it's kind of a mini coral reef already, will remove any traces of algae from the rocks. And then you can take them out. You can make sure the water chemistry is right, etc. You can then take the rocks out and put them in your aquarium and have great results. They look good in an aquarium, lots of color. And that only gets better if the aquarium manager knows what he's doing with lighting and chemistry and water flow. Here's an example of another substrate I like to use. It's called oolite. And it's kind of a mini refugium for small creatures that hide inside those larger pores. The coquina is actually better. That's the main rock I'm using for doing a function of what we call denitrification. Inside the coquina, because it's so porous, about 30%, the pore spaces are just the right size for colonization by microorganisms and larval organisms, and they end up chemically removing nitrogen from the water. So all your nitrogenous wastes break down to nitrate inside of the rocks. Nitrate turns into atmospheric nitrogen and it bubbles off and it leaves the environment, which is a good thing because that starves any seaweed out. Some of the corals we can grow, and you'll read admonishments, you shall not harvest any stony coral in the Florida Keys, and that's okay, but as a rock farmer, anything that grows on my rock or is attached to the rock, unless it's an endangered species, and there's a half a dozen corals I cannot take the rocks if they're growing on it. But most of the corals at this depth are not the endangered elkhorns, etc., because they're shallow water. Although I think they might be able to grow at that depth, they have not because there's no opportunity for them to. Yeah, so what we do with the corals, we remove them from the live rock And that turns out to be an important step. Keep them separate. Otherwise, it seems like the live rock are pulling so much nutrients out of the water that it actually tends to starve what the coral can generate, and the corals will just gradually disappear. But if you remove them with a little Dremel tool called fragging, you can take these little colonies off, and they do great in an aquarium. So yes, you can harvest Caribbean corals. It's a good example of the Tubastrea, which is one that doesn't do photosynthesis. You have to feed it plankton and things like ground up seafood, etc. It does very well as long as you're feeding it regularly. As is the case for these soft corals that start to grow on the farm. You can see those little polyps on the gorgonian here. They're capturing little particles from the ocean water, and that's how they're mostly feeding. They're getting a little bit of photosynthesis in some of them, but mostly they're filter feeders. And what happens when you maintain these rocks, when you put them in an installation properly? This display is from a zoo up in Ohio, where we transported all these ecopods, truckload, 2 pickup loads and a trailer load. They've actually made 2 displays out of this. This is one of 2, but this is a 2-year-old display where all these invertebrates have grown out of the rocks. Nothing was added. The only thing added here are those little fish swimming around. But yeah, this is way different than you can get with any other live rock for an aquarium. Most of them don't have this ability to explode with growth, because they're shipping it basically dry, and those little larval organisms don't survive. So concluding notes, we sell to zoos and serious hobbyists, limited market, big logistical challenges. Everything's personally delivered. So I have to say I'm the diver and I'm the driver. I take it to the customer, and it's really fun further north you get, where people haven't been to the ocean for a long time. Pop the lid on one of these buckets and you smell the ocean environment, and it's an immediate gratification. And there'll be a lot of critters cruising around in there. Like I said, if you leave them in the buckets for a while, give them a little bit of light, keep them aerated well and temperature controlled, any seaweed in there gets consumed by the little crabs, etc., that are living in there. Now, these cleaner species that I've shown you a few of could be useful for aquaculture operations, more in a confined area type operation, where you might have a school of fish, for example. I think if you had some of these tripods around that, you'd have a production of the cleaner organisms, and they're going to find any little niche where they can work. And I can envision little shelter boxes inside a confinement area becoming cleaner stations for natural parasite control. Could be an advantage. Our business is regulated by 3 different agencies: NOAA, Fish and Wildlife Commission, and Florida Department of Ag and Consumer Services. There are also 6 on-water and shoreside agencies that are inspecting and enforcing. So we're pretty well covered up, and we have to play it very clean, which is good. But yeah, the Department of Interior regulates this. We pay them a lease because we're in federal waters. The Coast Guard's active in enforcement. NOAA, Fish and Wildlife Commission, Florida Marine Patrol, and Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. They all have patrol boats. I love it when they come over to inspect us. Most of them don't know the rules as well as I do, because I'm living with it. This is a rather obscure section of the laws. But one thing you've got to have is your original permits anytime they inspect you when you're carrying the live rock. If there's anybody interested in doing this kind of natural bottom clearing, algae control, or just having the benefits of biodiversity like cleaner stations, I'm happy to help train people doing this. It's not that hard. Um, but yeah, it's come from a lot of experience. So I want to share that where it's applicable. And we're in the field 2 months out of the year. Everybody here is invited to visit as long as you're a certified scuba diver. Just drop me a line. I'll put you on the list. Be down there in month of November operating. So that's a good opportunity because the field biology lab where we're operating has these beautiful sunset views. And guess how much it costs to stay there? $15 a day. Belongs to the University of Georgia. They like what we're doing and let us have the lab. We can accommodate up to 10 people. We can do our rock drilling operation out in the back lot. And it's got everything we need: wireless, air conditioning, kitchen, sleep facilities for 10, couple of bathrooms, laundry, everything you need. So come on down and see what we're doing firsthand, especially if you're a diver. I think you'll get a lot out of that. And I think we're about done. Yep, so if any questions, I see a chat.
Yeah, that was awesome, Tim. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I guess if there aren't any questions, I will say one thing. I think we need, as an industry, there's a great potential here to harness this beautiful habitat of the sand flats that exists offshore of any coral reefs, all up and down the east coast of Florida and into the Gulf of Mexico. And there's just nothing much going on out there. It's barren, it's a desert, and it's a huge area. Today they say 2% of the Earth's surface is coral reef, but it's got 25% of the world's biodiversity, which is a lot. And of course, there's so much production on a healthy coral reef going on. A lot of people subsist on it in island nations. We could take advantage of that and just produce so much seafood in an open aquaculture system. I call it open aquaculture. You don't necessarily have to have an enclosure, because out in the sand flats, if you make a little patch reef that didn't exist before, biology is going to be all over that area. So all we'd have to do is get the government to recognize this as a protected area, maybe a few marker buoys around it, prohibiting fishing. We could just blow the lid off of aquaculture, fruit production in the USA. So if there's anybody here listening from the regulatory arena, this would be something I would love to pursue. And I'm willing to help with lobbying if that makes sense to you guys.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea. And yeah, and if people do have questions, please feel free to leave them in the chat. I'm also going to put a link to the exit survey for this session. It's just a quick few questions, helps us improve these sessions, which we have regularly, and we'll send out future ones in our newsletter. But yeah, Tim, I think like your specific operation with like coral reefs is sort of niche in the world of aquaculture, which I'm still relatively new to. But I at the same time, I do see it sort of connected to this more broader conversation about offshore aquaculture and how that's very popular in other parts of the world, but not necessarily in the United States, where we're behind, like you said, regulatory wise. So I was just curious, like we just had one of our members, or actually two of our members, share an article about co-location, which has to do with like aquaculture with clean energy operations.
Yeah.
Obviously, yours is a little different, but I see it as sort of similar as far as you're sort of combining aquaculture with reef restoration. So I was curious if you saw it that way.
Absolutely. In fact, what I'm going to be doing in November, I've got a second site that's about a sixth of a mile further out and even deeper. It's about 70 foot. I'm going to start planting tripods out there. And I think what I'm going to find as we go further out uh, is some survival ability from what I call the common hothouse earth. And if you read the IPCC reports, global warming is not going to slow down no matter what we do. It's going to get hotter for the rest of our lives because we're starting to trip various feedback mechanisms like the tundra being thawed in the north and all that organic matter being released and all that carbon dioxide coming out. It's going to get worse regardless of what we do, short of actively removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And that's a big task. It took us, you know, over 150 years to pop the CO2 levels to where they are today. It's going to take us a long time to get them under control. And that's, I'm hoping we can get it under control, like net zero by, 2030, 2040, 2050. We got to get this done. But even so, it's going to keep getting hotter. And these environments, this is why I call it the Keys Reefs, they're a killing field. And people doing restoration, planting corals on the same killing field, they're not having good results. My hat's off to their efforts and their hard work. They've done a good job of collecting various examples of the genetics and locating them in onshore labs where they're preserved like a seed bank. But as far as the reefs of Florida go, and I hate to say it, it breaks my heart, they're doomed. And most experts would agree, unless they're actively doing this restoration work. They're not looking at the forest, they're looking at the trees. Woods Hole is a good example of a place that's looking at the forest, and they just flat out say that the current efforts are failing. And so I'm trying to provide an escape hatch for the reef environment to be able to migrate out, but we got to do it in a larger sense. And this commercial aquaculture helping fund that and take advantage of it. And all these organisms that we won't necessarily be eating, but still functioning in a reef environment, kind of blows my mind as to the amount of potential, especially future potential, and why this would be worthwhile once the reefs are dead, and they are dying. So.
Right. Yeah, well, I have another question, but I don't want to take up the floor. If anybody else, I'll give an opportunity. If anybody else wants to ask a question, you can raise your hand or put it in the chat and I can read it out.
Well, I think we got it done in an hour, and I'm a little surprised because it's a complicated topic. I hope it was something you could follow along with. I've got a blue paper that I've published on the exchange under open aquaculture that gives a lot more examples of things like the symbiotic relationships and just kind of builds on the story. I had to cut a lot of that out to get this done quickly. I've also got a Facebook page called Terra Subaqua, which it's kind of current events. Every time I go, I pack a little GoPro with me. And I'm not much of a photographer. I am a farmer first. But I get the chance to see some interesting things. One of the things I've always looked forward to as a zoologist is having the apex predators come to the farm, that being sharks. And the last trip I was down, I got 7 days of diving, and we had 3 shark encounters during that time.
Wow.
So it's picking up. Business is good. ecology's building. Trip before that, I had a pod of porpoises when I anchored up at my farm. They're just diving and having a ball, using my farm as their lunch counter. But again, I don't begrudge the predation because it all serves a purpose of balancing the ecosystem so that the corals and coralline algae and colorful organisms, they can survive without being smothered by algae. I know it's kind of a hard thing to make
Yeah.
it intuitive, but trust me, it's real. Got to have the
Yeah.
apex predators.
I mean, I'll take an opportunity to ask another question, which is you mentioned your background, but I'm curious, like how did you come about to start this business? How did this idea come about?
Goes back to my childhood. Hate to say it, it's been a life passion. Been trying to find a way to express it since I was a kid. Growing up in New Jersey, south coast of Jersey, where you used to see porpoises playing offshore. We'd go fishing, we'd catch flounder the size of doormats. Had a ball with that as a kid, and I still enjoy seafood today. I don't allow fishing on the farm, and it's actually illegal. And that's okay with me because we're trying to do something different there, but I'm okay with responsible seafood harvesting. Unfortunately, that's not very typical in the real world, but yeah, I'm selective about what I eat, but I do enjoy seafood. And those things combined, as I was working in the R&D field, got exposed to many, many ideas. Believe it or not, they kind of facilitated some of the off-the-wall ideas because I encountered so many of those doing research and development. Even though it was on shore, it's applicable. For example, on shore, the big topic in biology is called landscape ecology. That's only about 15, 20 years old now, but it's a realization that if you start out with a desert, and as an example, one of the facets of it, and you put some structure in it, animals will start to become available. They will fertilize the soil, plants will grow up. There's an ecosystem. You can actually convert deserts to a grassland, for example. It's being done over in the eastern countries to surprisingly large
Right.
extent. But so there's a equivalent called seascape ecology now in the field, and it basically is exploring the fact that these bottom structures, vertical structures, are supporting the biology, and where they are diminished or disappearing, there's less biology. Kind of understandable common sense for fishermen who are always looking for cover to be the good fishing ground, but the scientific community has been documenting that in detail for about 15 years. Seascape ecology, one of my favorite topics. And
Yeah,
it
it's
definitely
fascinating.
applies to my operation.
And so
Yeah,
you mentioned the Facebook page, which I dropped the link to that in the chat if anybody wants to check it out. But what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
well, you can drop me a line on the website also. There's a terrasubaqua.com. So that's all one word, TERRASUBAQUA.com. And it's under development. It's a little rough right now, but there is a section there where you can connect. But yeah, my email is available on LinkedIn and other places. It's timbirth, TIMBIRTH @gmail.com.
Perfect.
So I'd
And
love to
I'll
hear from,
also
yeah,
go ahead, Tim.
yeah, anybody that's interested in getting involved, like I say, if you're at least an intermediate level scuba diver, even if you're a new scuba diver, if you're feeling comfortable with it, we'll get you a safety diver to go out with you so that you're not going to get in trouble. But it's really simple. It's like a big swimming pool out there, honestly. And
Yeah, I might seriously take you up on that. I think that would be
you really
awesome.
should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Huge net.
$15, that doesn't sound bad.
I know. You can't live at home that cheap.
Yeah.
So get your butt down there in November, Joe, and I'll make a believer out of you. And
Sure.
we, to get together with some of the other members here, I really think we need to lobby this.
Oh,
So,
Tina does have a I see Tina in the chat does have a question. She's asking how deep. I think you mentioned it, but
yeah.
how deep are your rock farms?
So actually it's 57 foot now. Started out 56, but the ocean's getting deeper. 57 foot is my shallow site, which is right at the edge of intermediate diver skill. Uh, Pretty safe all around, especially if you're using nitrox, which I favor a lot. That's like double the oxygen in my tank. So it's a special mix. Very available to sport divers, etc. Highly recommend it because on one little trip out, let's say 5, 6 hour trip out on my boat, I can dive 3 times. With air, you can only dive twice. So it's worthwhile. Get a lot more diving in, and you feel a lot better. Because that oxygen versus nitrogen in your body. Nitrogen is a depressant, oxygen is a stimulant. And I come up after diving a few days, I feel like like I'm 50 years old again. I feel great,
Yeah.
and it turns that 56 foot into something like a 35 foot equivalent air depth, which is almost, we call it pretzel proof. You can't get bent. You can try real hard, and you probably get there after on your third dive. But with nitrox, I do a 10-minute surface interval, and I'm back in the water. With air, you got to wait almost an hour.
Mm.
And then the second site is 70 feet, which is like a 45 foot equivalent air depth with the nitrox. Still a very safe diving zone. It's just a psychological, yeah, the surface is 70 feet up there now. But you can still see the surface, which is a good reassuring thing.
Right.
And yeah, like I say, I've been doing the diving so long, I don't worry about making it to the surface at all. But yeah, people that are well trained, they've got all kinds of techniques, including sharing air with your buddy, etc., where there's no serious risk. The risk is driving down to the Keys in your vehicle. That's where you're going to get hurt.
Right. All right. Well, yeah, I think that about does it. I also left the link for the AIE YouTube if you'd like to watch this session when it's uploaded or share it. And then our past sessions are also up there. But yeah, thanks to everybody who joined. Thank you, Tim, again for presenting. And we will see you all on the exchange. Have
My
a good
pleasure.
week.
Thank you for the attendees.